All right. Welcome in, everyone. Diving right in today to a topic that's pretty crucial, I think, in any organization, especially given, how complex everything is these days.
Mhm.
We're talking about enterprise-wide risk management, ERM for
Very bum, yeah.
basically the shift away from, each department just kind of worrying about their own little risks to a much more integrated, unified approach across the entire business.
Right.
And to help us unpack this, we've got a fantastic article by Pritesh Biswas that really goes deep.
Yeah, Biswas does a great job of laying it all out, really. And one of the things that jumped out at me right from the start is how this idea of ERM even came about. It's not like risk management just appeared one day as this all-encompassing thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's got this history, right?
Yeah.
The article touches on this, how it kind of evolved from managing specific areas like, problems with projects or financial stuff going a bit wobbly, or just operational snags. And often these were all dealt with in their own little silos.
Yeah. Yeah. Each department was doing its own thing.
Exactly. So what do you think? What do you think sparked this move towards this bigger picture of ERM? Was it was it just a realization that, hey, wait a minute, all these risks, they're not as separate as we thought they were?
Yeah, I think it was definitely that realization, that sort of
Yeah.
moment, right, where organizations started to see that they're dealing with this whole interconnected web of risks that really do touch every part of how they operate. And it's not just about avoiding problems, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding how all these potential issues, uh, both the threats and the opportunities, because there are opportunities within controls and hazards as well, can collectively impact, the things that really matter to the organization.
Mhm.
Its goals, its dependencies, its core processes.
Absolutely. And that interconnectedness is key. With the old way of doing things, it was easy to miss how a problem in one area could ripple out and cause trouble somewhere else.
Yeah.
ERM is designed to give you that panoramic view, to see your whole risk landscape as one big dynamic portfolio rather than just a bunch of separate little fires to put out.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, as we go through Biswas' article, our mission is to really get a grip on those essential features of ERM. What are the real world benefits? How are companies actually using this stuff?
Makes sense.
So let's jump right in. Biswas outlines 10 key features of ERM. The first one is that it covers all risk areas, and we're talking, the whole shebang: financial risks, operational risks, compliance risks, the big strategic risks, even something as vital as reputation.
Right. It's a real mindset shift for a lot of organizations. I mean, you go from a situation where, say, your finance team is mainly worried about financial risks
Mhm.
to a framework where everyone's thinking about how, I don't know, a negative customer review online, a reputational risk could actually end up hitting the bottom line.
Right.
Or how a new government regulation, something on the compliance side, might force you to make a big strategic change.
Exactly. The second key feature is that ERM manages these risks, not as isolated things, but as a portfolio, right? We've touched on this already, but it's worth emphasizing.
Yeah, it's about seeing the whole ecosystem, all the potential problems and opportunities all linked together.
Right.
And when you do that, when you look at the portfolio as a whole, you start to understand your real risk exposure in a much, much deeper way. I mean, some risks might cancel each other out, right?
Right.
While others could combine, and suddenly you've got this huge headache you never even saw coming. ERM helps you spot those connections and really understand the cumulative effect of all these risks together.
Yeah, absolutely. The third feature focuses on context, both internal and external. What's happening inside the organization and what's going on in the wider world, understanding your own systems and the concerns of all your stakeholders.
Right. I mean, thinking about the external stuff, market trends, what your competitors are doing, any big changes in regulations, that's just as crucial as knowing your own strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And when you factor in what your stakeholders care about, investors, customers, employees, you get this really complete picture of your risk landscape.
Right. Feature number 4 is the explicit recognition that risks are linked. And when they gang up on you, the impact can be way bigger and way different than just adding up the individual risks.
Yeah, think about a cyber attack.
Right.
It starts out as a technology risk, right? Maybe an operational risk.
Yeah.
But if you lose sensitive customer data, suddenly you're looking at potential lawsuits, regulatory fines, a big hit to your reputation.
Exactly.
It's a cascade. And ERM helps you see those dominoes lined up from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. Feature 5 is about having a structured process. So ERM brings this consistent framework to managing all types of risk, whether they're easily quantifiable or more qualitative. It's about bringing some order to what can often feel like a very chaotic landscape.
Yeah, it's about being rigorous, being disciplined. It takes risk management away from being this reactive ad hoc thing and makes it systematic.
Right, you've got a process you can rely on no matter what kind of risk pops up.
Exactly.
Number 6 is about integrating risk management into decision making.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be this separate thing off to the side. It needs to be woven into the fabric of how the organization operates.
Yeah, it should be baked into everything. Strategic planning, resource allocation, project management, any major decision. ERM is about making risk a natural part of how people think and act within the organization.
Right, exactly. Feature 7 is an interesting one. It's about figuring out which risks the organization is willing to take to achieve its strategic goals.
Yeah, the whole idea of risk appetite.
Right.
And this is really key. I mean, risk isn't always something to be avoided entirely.
Yeah.
Smart companies take calculated risks to grow, to innovate. ERM gives you a way to define those boundaries to understand the level and types of risk that you're comfortable with.
Right. Makes sense. Feature 8 is communication. ERM helps you talk about risk effectively, making sure everyone in the organization understands what the key risks are and why they should care.
Yeah, communication is absolutely vital. You want a culture where everybody's aware of risk, where they understand the potential consequences and their role in managing it.
Right. Feature 9 is about how ERM supports internal audit. It provides the structure and documentation that internal audit can use to give the board assurance that risk management is actually working.
Yeah, internal audit is a crucial oversight function. They need to be able to verify that the right processes are in place, that people are following them, and that it's actually helping the organization achieve its goals.
Right. And the 10th key feature is that ERM positions effective risk management as a competitive advantage.
Exactly. Not just a cost or a burden, but something that can actually help the organization perform better.
Right, because if you're proactively understanding and managing your risks, you can avoid those costly mistakes, seize opportunities that others might miss, and ultimately, come out ahead in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
So that's a great overview of the 10 features.
Yeah.
But to really bring it to life, Biswas gives us this really detailed example of ERM in an oil and gas company.
Yeah, really interesting example. I mean, this is a sector that faces a huge range of risks, right?
Yeah.
They've got to think about operational risks, equipment breaking down, oil spills. Then there are financial risks, like the wild swings in oil prices.
Right.
Compliance and regulatory risks are massive in this sector with all the environmental regulations and often operating in politically unstable regions.
Right. Yeah.
Then they've got to consider those big strategic risks like global energy demand shifting or geopolitical stuff happening.
Right.
And of course, reputational risks, which can blow up after an environmental incident or a protest by a local community. And then on top of all that, you've got the growing threat of technology risks, like cyber attacks on critical infrastructure.
Yeah. So it's a really comprehensive picture.
What I like about this example, though, is the level of detail.
Right.
Biswas provides specific examples for each of those categories. So for operational risks, it's not just something might go wrong, it's equipment failure or worker safety incidents.
Right. Very concrete.
Exactly. For financial risks, it's not just markets might change, it's oil price volatility or exchange rate fluctuations.
Mm-hmm.
That specificity is crucial.
Right. And that leads into the next step, which is risk assessment and prioritization. This is where you look at how much damage each risk could do and how likely it is to actually happen.
Yeah. The example uses a risk matrix, which is pretty common. They map each risk based on its potential impact and its likelihood. So they can see visually which risks need the most attention, those high impact, high likelihood events that could really hurt the business.
Right. And Biswas gives the example of an environmental spill as a classic high impact, high likelihood risk in this sector.
Yeah.
Something that demands, serious resources and preventative measures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas a small fluctuation in currency exchange rates might be seen as low impact and low likelihood, something to keep an eye on but not panic about.
Yeah.
That prioritization is essential because no one has unlimited resources, right?
Right.
You need to focus your effort on the risks that pose the biggest threat to your goals.
Absolutely. After assessment comes risk response planning. The example outlines 4 main ways this oil and gas company deals with the risks they've identified. First one is risk avoidance, which is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. In their case, it means deciding not to operate in certain regions, places known for political instability.
Yep.
By avoiding those areas entirely, they eliminate that particular risk.
Right. Sometimes the simplest solution is just to steer clear.
Yeah, exactly.
Then there's risk mitigation. This is about taking steps to reduce the likelihood of a risk happening or the severity of its impact if it does.
Right. So for an oil and gas company, that might mean investing heavily in safety systems to minimize the chances of a spill,
Right.
or keeping their equipment well maintained to reduce the risk of something breaking down.
Yeah, it's about putting those robust controls in place.
Exactly.
Third response is risk transfer. The most common way to do this is through insurance.
Right. For those big, potentially catastrophic events like a natural disaster or a major piece of equipment failing, insurance lets the company share that burden with someone else.
Right.
They transfer some of that financial risk to the insurer.
Exactly. And the final response is risk acceptance. Sometimes, after looking at all the options, the best course of action is just to accept a particular risk.
Yeah. The example talks about accepting minor fluctuations in oil prices, which is, part and parcel of operating in that industry.
Yeah.
They factor those potential fluctuations into their planning and budgeting.
Right. So that's how they deal with the risks.
Yeah.
But then there's the question of integration across the organization.
Yeah.
ERM isn't something that just happens in one department.
Yeah.
It needs to be part of everyone's responsibility.
Right. This talks about how different departments contribute. Operations teams are on the front lines of mitigating those operational risks.
Yeah.
Finance is using hedging strategies to manage financial risks. Legal and compliance are making sure the company is following all the rules.
Right. It's a real team effort.
Absolutely. And then you've got those risk committees operating at different levels of the organization to make sure there's regular communication and reporting.
Right. To keep everyone informed and aligned on the company's risk appetite.
Exactly. Those committees are like the central nervous system for risk information.
Right. Right. And then, of course, there's the whole process of risk monitoring and reporting. The article talks about this key tool, the risk register.
Yeah, the risk register is like your central database for everything related to risk.
Right.
It lists all the identified risks,
Yeah.
their status, any actions being taken to mitigate them, and key metrics for tracking progress. It gives you that up-to-date snapshot of your risk landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. And the risk register is not just an internal document. It also provides information to senior management and the board through regular reports, like those quarterly updates on key risk exposures and mitigation strategies.
Right.
Plus, if a significant risk event happens, it triggers an immediate review.
Exactly. That ongoing monitoring and reporting are essential to make sure your risk management framework stays relevant and effective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a set it and forget it system.
Right.
Which brings us to the last point in the oil and gas example.
Yeah.
Continuous improvement. ERM is an ongoing process that needs regular updates and refinements.
Yeah, the world doesn't stand still, right?
Yep.
Right. New regulations come out, market conditions change, new technologies emerge.
Right, right.
All of that means you have to reassess your risks and update your ERM framework. The company in the example does annual reviews to make sure they're still aligned with best practices and ready for any new threats.
Yeah, good practice. So that oil and gas example really helps to ground those 10 features of ERM in a real-world setting.
Yeah, definitely.
Now let's look at how ERM is actually defined. BISWAS gives us several definitions from different organizations.
It's interesting to see the common themes, but also some subtle differences in emphasis. So COSO, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, they define ERM as a process that involves everyone from the board down, applied across the whole enterprise.
Okay.
It's designed to identify potential events that could affect the organization, manage risk within its appetite, and provide reasonable assurance that it's going to achieve its objectives.
Okay.
Quite a mouthful. The Institute of Internal Auditors, on the other hand, they focus on ERM as this rigorous and coordinated approach to proactively assessing and responding to all those risks that could impact an organization's strategic and financial goals.
Okay, so a bit more about the proactive side of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
HM Treasury, their definition really highlights the practical steps involved, identifying risks, assessing their impact, making judgments about them, assigning ownership, taking action to reduce them, and then monitoring progress.
Right. So very, very action-oriented.
Yeah. And then you've got RIMS, the Risk and Insurance Management Society. They frame ERM as a strategic business discipline that helps an organization achieve its objectives by addressing all the risks it faces and managing the combined impact of those risks as a portfolio.
Okay, so very much emphasizing that strategic element.
Right.
Okay, so when you bring all these definitions together, it's clear that ERM is a process. It's a set of actions, but it's also about results.
Yeah.
It's about effectively managing risks within your appetite and making sure you hit your objectives. And it has this big impact on how you operate, leading to better decision-making, more efficient processes, a smoother operation overall.
Right.
And BISWAS gives us this great acronym to remember the main outcomes, MADE2.
MADE2. Catchy.
It stands for mandatory obligations fulfilled, assurance obtained, decision-making enhanced, and effective and efficient core processes introduced.
Okay, I would like it.
Yeah, it's a nice way to summarize those tangible benefits. But then there's also this wider set of benefits that BISWAS categorizes under the acronym FIRM.
Firm. Okay.
Yeah, let's break those down.
All right.
So starting with the financial benefits, ERM can lead to a reduced cost of funding, better control over capital expenditure approvals, increased profitability, more accurate reporting of financial risks, and stronger corporate governance.
Yeah, that's quite a list.
Right. I mean, those are some pretty compelling bottom line improvements for any organization.
That's
Then there are the infrastructure benefits. Effective ERM can lead to greater efficiency, hopefully no major disruptions, improved morale among staff and suppliers, more targeted efforts in reducing risks and costs, and ultimately a reduction in overall operating costs.
so basically making everything run more smoothly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Reputationally, implementing ERM can lead to happier regulators, a stronger brand, enhanced shareholder value, positive PR, and an improved public perception overall.
Right. So not just about the hard numbers, but also how the organization is perceived.
Exactly. And then finally, the marketplace benefits.
Right.
ERM can help you maximize commercial opportunities, establish a stronger market presence, increase customer spending and satisfaction, lead to a higher ratio of successful business ventures, and hopefully a lower ratio of disasters.
So basically winning in the marketplace.
Yeah. Painting that picture of a more resilient and successful organization.
Right.
Now, moving on, BISWAS looks at how ERM is applied in the energy and finance sector specifically.
Right, because each sector has its own unique set of risks.
Right.
So in the energy sector, we already saw that with the oil and gas example, right? Big focus on operational risks, environmental and regulatory risks, market risks, and those long-term strategic risks.
Right.
In finance, it's more about credit risk, market risk, operational risks, things like internal process failures and cyber attacks, regulatory risk, of course, and then liquidity risk, making sure you've got enough cash on hand.
Right. But even though the risks are different, the underlying principles of ERM stability, better decision-making, resilience, those are equally applicable to both.
Yeah, absolutely. And in finance, BISWAS points out that a key driver for ERM is to increase shareholder value
Right.
by using capital more efficiently, making better financial decisions, and building confidence among investors.
Yeah, makes sense. It's interesting how BISWAS talks about the traditional focus of ERM in energy, which has historically been very much on the financial side of things, often managed by treasury departments.
Hmm.
Whereas in finance, regulations like Basel III and Solvency II
Yeah.
have really pushed for wider adoption of ERM, especially in areas like operational risk management.
Right. And of course, we can't talk about risk management without talking about the global banking crisis.
Yeah.
That was a wake-up call for everyone. And Espos's point is that the problem wasn't the principles of risk management themselves.
Right.
It was how they were applied.
Yeah.
There was this failure to properly analyze risk and reward and a massive underestimation of those extreme low probability, high impact events.
Right. The so-called black swan events.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this leads us to the connection between ERM and business continuity and this broader idea of resilience.
Right.
BISWAS talks about how the risk assessment in ERM and the business impact analysis and business continuity planning, they really complement each other.
Yeah. They're both about figuring out what's most critical to the organization.
Right.
ERM looks at all the risks that could prevent you from achieving your goals, disrupt your processes. Business impact analysis zooms in on the specific activities that need to keep running for the organization to function.
Yeah. But the next steps after identification, they diverge. ERM focuses on managing those risks, avoidance, mitigation, transfer, acceptance. While business continuity is about the specific actions you take after a disruptive event happens to keep those critical activities going.
Right. And then there's this broader concept of resilience, which Biswas defines as the ability to absorb and adapt to change.
Right.
And in the context of risk management, it's about more than just bouncing back.
Yeah.
It's about anticipating disruptions, preparing for them, responding effectively, and coming back even stronger.
Right. And Biswas outlines several key aspects of building resilience.
Mm.
Proactive planning, agility and flexibility, strong crisis management, continuous improvement, stakeholder engagement, leveraging technology and data, a culture of resilience, and making sure you've got the resources to handle whatever comes your way.
Yeah, it's about being prepared, being adaptable, being able to learn and adjust.
Right. To prevent disruptions, protect your assets, prepare for the unexpected, respond effectively, recover quickly, and then review and learn from the experience.
Exactly. And Biswas makes the point that risk management professionals and business continuity experts should be working more closely together.
Yeah. To really strengthen that organizational resilience.
Right.
Now, to actively boost resilience, Biswas suggests focusing on rapid response and learning from disruptions, staying aware of internal and external changes that could introduce new risks, and prioritizing the prevention, protection, and preparation of all your resources. Financial, human, technological, you name it.
Yeah, it's about being proactive and adaptable.
Yep.
And I like the parallel he draws between the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, the PDCA cycle
Yep.
from quality management, and the Plan, Implement, Measure, Learn approach that's often used for risk management initiatives.
Right. It emphasizes that iterative, continuous process. Now, finally, let's talk about managing emerging risks. Biswas explains that as things change, new risks pop up. And these can be really tricky to deal with if you don't have the right framework.
Yeah. He gives us a helpful way to categorize these emerging risks.
Right.
You've got new risks in a familiar context, known risks in a new context, and then those completely new risks that nobody's seen before.
Right. And globalization, rapid technological change, those complex supply chains, those have all made the landscape of emerging risks much more dynamic.
Definitely.
And some emerging risks are within your control, like those associated with entering new markets or adopting new technologies. But then there are those big uncontrollable ones like climate change, government debt, national security issues, demographic shifts.
Yeah, the big systemic risks.
Right, exactly. And when it comes to managing these emerging risks, Biswas suggests looking at them through the lens of hazards, controls, and opportunities.
Right. And thinking about their risk velocity, how fast they can develop and escalate.
Yeah. So to wrap up this deep dive into enterprise-wide risk management, based on Biswas's article, I think the key takeaway is that ERM is a really fundamental shift in how we think about risk.
Yeah.
It's about understanding those interconnections, focusing on the risks that matter most, and building that resilience to deal with an increasingly uncertain world.
And the benefits are huge. Better decisions, more efficient operations, increased stakeholder confidence, a more sustainable and successful organization.
Right. So I guess the question for everyone listening is, where do you see an opportunity for a more integrated approach to risk in your own context,
Yeah,
whether it's at work or even in your personal life?
good question.
Where could taking that more holistic view make a real difference? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for